Welcome, everyone. I'm Kathleen McMahon, and this is Thor. And we're here today to show you how we rolled out a rebrand in secret using feature flags. Before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. You are just killing me, dude. For those who like to follow along, my presentation will be posted on Noticed. That's https://noti.st.resource11. The official deck will be posted after this talk, but if you want, you can take a look at my trajectory deck if you want to see image descriptions, code examples, and if you need to have speaking notes, if you need some extra help with vision. Okay, Thor? All right. So you can follow me at Resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. But let's back up a little bit more so I can introduce myself better. So I'm an engineer and a designer, and I like to speak about things with, companion cats, and I race bikes very badly. Mostly, you will see me in costume racing 2 laps to your 6 at the back of a pack on a single speed with a bunch of onlookers in the crowd laughing at me toasting with their beverages. So while I'm an engineer, designer, and speaker, I'm also a design engineer on the UX Next team at LaunchDarkly. Our team enables other designers and engineers to craft high-quality experiences for our customers. Part of our work includes maturing the design system. And if you have ever worked on a design system, you know there are a lot of things to consider. Similar to herding kittens, maturing a great design system can be tough with so many moving parts. If your squad is small, you have to be very strategic, especially when your product roadmap changes. For example, what happens if your creative team has refreshed the brand and your team is presented with an updated brand North Star? It's definitely a surprise Pikachu moment. But you may ask, what is a brand North Star? Well, there's this article by M81 Creative that gives a great explanation. Your brand's North Star is the promise that you are making to your customers. Now, LaunchDarkly's North Star is brought through in their core message. Software powers the world. LaunchDarkly empowers all teams to deliver and control their software. We lean into this mission with our colors, typography, and our signature logo. Even the position of our logo mark to the right of the logo type embodies our core beliefs. In a world where every company is a software company, LaunchDarkly leads the way and saves the day. Creating a North Star takes time to do right. You have to do things like strategy, competitive analysis, user and customer insights, creative explorations, and this process can take up to many months and sometimes up to a year. And once this process is done, you will have some key outputs like logos, colors, typography, and such. And once that North Star is established, it's time for teams to go to work to roll those branding visuals into the marketing site and the product app. Now, this is where it gets tricky. While our team was informed about the brand refresh at the earliest possible moment, we had one wrinkle, and it's a big one. The time to the rebrand rollout to our customers was in 13 weeks. And it had to be a secret project for most of the company. That meant that the time to internal rollout to our teams was 10 weeks. So we had to pivot to figure out how to get things done because the inherent differences between a marketing site update and a product app. If you look, for example, at our marketing site over the years, you can see that visual refreshes can happen a bit more often. I mean, these are the most recent sites from 2014 to now. And on the other hand, visual refreshes happen less often in a product app because a rebrand can impact your established product roadmaps. And you need to be careful when the visuals between your marketing site and your product app get out of sync, because your product app will start looking outdated, and because outdated product app visuals will break that brand promise. So our team regrouped and thought, how can we get this done? And how do we do this without making any questionable decisions that may impact the product? Because you don't want to be making questionable decisions like, I don't know, making dishes that include Jell-O and shellfish. It's just not a good look. But thankfully, we work at a company that has a really cool product, feature flags. This means that we could set up a flagging structure and rebrand in stealth mode. We could make all of our changes alongside other teams, not disrupt other squads' roadmaps, all while the other product squads are not even aware that a brand refresh was happening at all. So, what do we use for flags in our use case? Well, we use them to control theming, data attributes, fonts, design tokens, HTML templates, and UI updates. And since we had to do this all in 10 weeks in secret, we had used this one flag as the basis of most of our changes, and used it as a prerequisite for other flags that we needed for testing out additional features in isolation. So the one flag that controlled all of our other flags were dependent on this Enable 2021 rebrand flag. And this flag was a prerequisite for other flags. So if this flag wasn't turned on, the other flags wouldn't work at all either. And because secret project, we could target specific users to be able to preview what changes we were working on. And once this flag was on, we could continue working on things like theming support, using data attributes, and to control whichever theme we wanted to use, we would use these two attributes: data theme equals Osmo, data theme equals legacy. But we also wanted to use our new font, Enter, in our visual refresh. So we added the Enable Enter flag. And this would have the rebrand flag as a prerequisite. And we could add that data attribute to our set of data attributes for theming. We would pair those data attributes values with React context and use hooks to create a theme context. And we would use a theme provider that we could leverage anywhere we needed in our app. And we created this use theme function for wherever we wanted to use this theme, and used our theme provider in the app entry point, leveraging our rebrand flag value to set the theme. And we pass that theme into the provider, which uses use effect hooks to set data attributes in the root element of our app. Now that app theming was scaffolded, we could continue work on things like design tokens. So before the North Star was revealed, our team was already refactoring our design token architecture. Our legacy token system was a blend of base and semantic tokens, and it wasn't scalable or themable. And that's how we did this refactor. That's why we were doing this refactor. But once this rebrand was announced, we had to adjust our tokens work without losing any of our progress. And since we were using data attributes controlled by a flag, we could target data attributes in our CSS to control the token values. And considering this 10-week time frame, we chose to focus on using the data attribute to map our semantic tokens to base tokens in either legacy or Osmo themes. Our squads have been leaning on using design tokens, so this would allow us to the retheme to happen seamlessly. So we used a one-to-one mapping and tested our rebrand by toggling on our flag. And this was especially helpful because our legacy tokens were blending base and semantics in their naming structure, and we could introduce a new set of semantic tokens quickly without much fuss. And the tokens that we were most concerned about were our application level tokens. And so now we could have a separate set of base tokens for all of our colors and fonts and our sizes in our themes for legacy and Osmo. So by leveraging our data attributes through feature flagging, we could test out these values at runtime and without impacting anyone else's work, and just adjust our values. And even better, we could use the data theme attribute to wrap blocks of CSS code. And when it's time to remove legacy styles, we could do it quickly. So I'm going to give you some more details later about this, but let me back up a little bit. If you've never heard of design tokens, Sanka Road tweeted a great definition. Design tokens are an abstraction for everything impacting the visual design of an app or platform. In other words, design tokens are design decisions propagated through a system. So generally, tokens span 3 categories: base, which are the raw values; semantic, which are aliased to those base values and shared across the application; and component tokens. Our legacy system was a blend of as you can see, a blend of base and semantic. And because of this, it wasn't scalable or themable. Because if you call something primary green base, well, what if your primary color becomes blue? This name doesn't make sense anymore. This is why we were refactoring. So with these data attributes, this is what we could do. We could take these set of semantic tokens that were mapped to those older, danger red base, info blue base, and take those and leverage that data theme attribute in CSS. And by doing that, we could map those new names of like color, error, dark to a different raw value. And this would allow us to scale pretty quickly and adjust values on the fly. And we could do the same thing with testing out fonts. We could use those data attributes to swap out the alias the value of our new font into that font family base application level token. We could also, and this is how we would do with component tokens. Here's the values that we would use for our legacy theme. And then when we added the data theme for Osmo, our new brand, we could re-alias those colors. And what's great about that, and we'll go back for a second, is old net value, new value, and all we have to do is remove that old block, remove that attribute, and we're ready to go once we're done our whole rebrand. So it makes this easier for us to pay down the tech debt as we go. We also use flags in other ways for things like performance optimizations. In our HTML templates, we use the Go SDK and Go templates on the back end to bootstrap our flag data into our HTML templates to give us just enough information to render our pages. And we use the rebrand feature flag to set the data theme attribute as a performance optimization. This way, we could have the HTML templates check for this flag and render the correct theme while we waited for the JavaScript to load and initialize the HTML. This way, we wouldn't have a flash of incorrectly styled content. So we wouldn't have the wrong theme loading as this site is being bootstrapped. We also use the enable inter flag value to preload the variable font only if the flag was on. This way, our app performance wouldn't take a hit from loading any unnecessary fonts if the flag was off. And for UI updates, we use the feature flag to control whether we would show or hide content on our left nav. For example, if our rebrand flag was off, the legacy theme would be true, and we could show icons in each of our left nav link items. So our users would have the expected UI experience in the legacy view in production while we were working on the rebranded nav in secret. For our top nav, we didn't have a top nav before, and now we do. By adding the top bar spike flag, we could add the top nav into the rebranded UI by turning on the flag. And since it's dependent on the rebrand flag, we could test this in isolation and just conditionally render this top bar through feature flags. And let me go back. I'm missing a slide. We will double check. Hold on. Click, click, click. You didn't. Okay, there is a slide missing, but I will talk you through it. Okay, so this was our rebrand flag, but we also have excuse me, we used this environment switcher, and in our environments, we could, whenever you create a new environment with LaunchDarkly, when you create a new project, excuse me, you get 2 default environments, production and test. And they are set, these environments are set to specific colors by default. And when we were doing the rebrand, we wanted to test out new default environment colors. So what we did was create a new flag for checking, for rebrand environment colors. And we used a multivariate flag here. And in our multivariate flag, in our variations, we would pass in blocks of JSON to test out color combinations on the fly. So in this JSON block, you would see hex values, and we would use these when the flag was activated. We could add in that JSON value to adjust the colors. And what's really nice about this is if we didn't like any of the colors, all we do is adjust the value of this variation hex value and save the flag, refresh the page, boom, it's there, and you get to test right on the fly. And like I said, and we use Go to store those values. Lastly, favicons. It's always a nice touch to have your favicons ready to go when you roll out your rebrand, rather than scrambling to update that little detail at the last moment, especially if you're using them in more than one environment. We added one more flag for this, which was the favicon environment variations, which also was it was dependent on whether the rebrand flag was on. And we would use strings in our variations here. And so with each of these variations, we'd have a different string and the optional name for what environment we were serving up. And we could serve up whichever favicon version we wanted, depending on the environment, in our HTML templates, which is pretty slick. Phew. Well, that was a lot. So to wrap up, with the power of feature flags, in a 10-week time frame, we could implement a substantial amount of changes to our product and roll out a product rebrand in stealth mode. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. That was great. Obviously, I was sitting. I didn't even know you all had this going on. I knew the rebrand was coming, but I had no idea that this was sitting in production. So, yeah,
Surprise.
that's pretty. Yeah, well, and given it was 10 weeks, I mean that's pretty impressive timeline. That's crazy.
Yeah, 10 weeks. You're like, whoa. Usually, I mean, imagine that. Like when you don't have feature flags, you're like, how are we going to do this? How are we not going to impact things? Pass out. Take your hats and run. Come back, take a breath.
Well, and especially something that large, I think the big thing is for me is you end up. So you say, okay, well, I'll create a branch and we'll go off on that branch and we'll do the work there. But then there's all this other work going on in the main branch, and then you've got to merge those 2 branches, and it becomes such a mess. And you also you have trouble sometimes getting who you want to be able to test in that particular branch to be able to see what you want them to be able to see. So, you didn't really go that too deep into it, but you could. Did we roll it out, or did we just say flip it on one day, or did we decide because you could roll it out, which is
we flipped it on.
Yeah,
we tested it with we had in our so we had that flag set up. Since we had that one flag where we could just control the targeting and everything else was just dependent on whether that flag was on and off, we didn't have to control the targeting in the other sub flags for all the different users. That was just if that flag's on, turn, this will show if it's on. But with that main rebrand flag, we could just target a subset of users, and we could, log in and test, in, a front end only mode, or, things like that. And then we could invite different stakeholders as users to be able to view things.
Right.
And
so in this case, like everybody was, this is just to clarify for folks, this was for the back end once you're logged in experience, right? So you knew who the users were. You had the token that told you who was logged in and whether they were allowed to see this.
It's more like, so when you're in the flag targeting, the flag targeting view, you can add whoever has a user account in the, in the project. And so we could target, individual users, or like, say our team was part of a group of users, like this team, these users are part of this other, group, that we could say, just target this. And as long as we logged in as ourselves, we could see it. Yeah.
And I'm curious how when let's say when you said, okay, we flipped it on, do you then go back and say, okay, we're going to remove some of that, like the data attribute stuff, or do you just like, okay, that we're going to go with that kind of way of theming it from here on out?
We're going to do what we can do. What's great about this is, so we had the two themes. We had, we had Osmo and Legacy. And what's nice about that is we can go back later on when we decide that we've shaken out what we needed to shake out. We can go back and remove the blocks of codes that were either targeting Legacy, or, like remove the blocks that didn't have the data theme, like of Osmo and CSS, and just, remove that data attribute. And then everything would just be ready to go. So we were just removing the old code and keeping the new code.
Right.
Those fancy if statements. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess you would just go back and say, remove the in the Go templates. There's no harm in it being there, but it just ends up kind of cluttering up your code base. So you probably just went back and cleared those out. And I think the way you all did this with only a handful of flags makes it easy to just kind of find those references in your code. Did you use the code refs feature to kind of be able to figure out where it was referenced, or just manually like global search?
We could use a code refs if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's since we had 6 flags, it wasn't 25 flags, or, all these other things. It's like you having this one, this one, main thing that was just like, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I thought like the usage of the JSON token for the coloring and stuff like that is very cool, because one of the things I feel like is, even for me, I'm relatively new, so I to using this stuff, and that's the part that fascinates me, is like feature flags can be like true false kind of things, just like, is it on, is it off? But they can also be more complex things, like, oh, I can send a whole batch of JSON data and do complex logic based, and even with the dependencies and different rules you can create, it's almost like a rules engine that can actually serve up complex data. I'm fascinated by the whole kind of idea of like, what are some of the things you can do beyond just like flip flag on, flip flag off kind of thing? What can I do with some of these more advanced data types? And that's really, I hadn't really thought about, like, oh, I could swap out whole color values. And was that done using like, were those values, those were in the CSS, right? Like you'd swap it out in the CSS, or how did you end up doing that?
So for those JSON, the multivariate flag for the JSON values, those were put into a Go file. So it was like basically those flag values were sent in to this Go file, and it's basically, there was one JSON object for Osmo and one JSON object for Legacy, and it's like, if it's this, serve up one. If it's A, serve up the A values. If it's B, serve up the B values. And it was really nice, because then you don't have to go back in the code and serve up, adjust the like find it and whatever. You could just, in the flag, the variation, tweak a hex code right there, save and refresh, and you see it right away. And then you could like firm it up. Yeah. Once you like remove the flag, you could like adjust where those values are when you're not testing things, then you could, go back into the code and say, okay, we've landed on this palette, so let's use it.
Right. So use that to just kind of tweak the palette and then finalize, like, and be able to see, like, oh, this is what it looks like with it on, this is what it looks like with it off, kind of like different flag values. Okay, that's really cool. I hadn't really thought about like how you would actually do that, change stuff in CSS. I mean, I guess if everything's getting built on the server level, like, do you use like just straight CSS, or is it like Sass?
CSS modules.
CSS modules. Oh,
Yes.
okay. Wow. I don't know a lot about CSS modules, so I'm really, really curious.
It's like Sass. Like it's CSS modules and post CSS. So post CSS allows you to like write things in a Sass-like manner. And what was nice about CSS modules is so in React, I mean, technically you could render in JSX, something that, I mean, the syntax for JSX or TSX, because we do TypeScript components, it looks like, if you're using semantic HTML, it looks exactly like HTML, but it really, it's like, it isn't, but it looks like, it's like, if you render, a button, it's not like it renders a button. It's like document create, like React create element button and pass the thing in. Like, it looks like this spaghetti, object under the hood. But for, a better way, in more of a reduce that cognitive load, TSX or JSX, looks like HTML. So if you are good at HTML, you're like, oh, I know this. I know this stuff, and I can zip around here. But when in standard vanilla, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you'd pass in a class name, a class into, into an element, and you pass in a class as a string. And in a component, you could pass in a class as a string. Like you could do that and be loading up some common files, but you also load your styles file, as an import, and then use it will load it like an object. And then you can say like styles dot, styles dot button, right? And then you say class name equals styles dot button, and then it looks for button, the button, and just applies it. But then you can also use it's that whole like object property value thing where you can start like mapping things using class names, this class names package to start concatenating classes and all these other like wonderful things that you can do, and with these efficiencies that, for me, I am more of a fan of modules versus that CSS and JS thing, which is really not, it's not for me. Just for me, it's like, it's not great for separation of concerns, maintainability. And I'm not going to start talking about that hot topic, about that one particular library that everyone swarms in and says it's amazing. It's like, but is it?
I think I know which library you're talking about.
Yeah, but like I was
at a conference last week, and that it came up, and oh my god, it was, nobody was in the middle for the most part. At least if they cared about, like they knew. I'm in the middle because I'll be honest, I'm dangerous with CSS in that I know enough to like screw things up, but that's about as good as I get. But yeah, everybody who worked on that, styling of apps was like, they either loved it and they're like, everybody should use it, or in the other group was like, we hate it, nobody should use it. And I think I'm assuming the audience would know what library this is.
But it's whenever you hear this topic, you always see that meme come up of like a bunch of like five individuals over at a sports stadium, all like leaning over saying, I think you're talking about this. Yeah. All weighing in with their opinions. That meme. So
yeah. It's that's and I hear you. I think it's divisive topic.
Yes,
for sure.
But yeah, CSS is really cool. And what was nice about this is you could the fact that you could leverage flags, you could leverage flags to leverage data attributes, because data attributes in HTML they're amazing. The way you can do things, right? You could do, data theme, and then it listens for things, and you can in CSS, you leverage an attribute. You don't have to add all these things. It's like there's so much power already built into the system. It's similar to any language, any programming language. It's like once you learn the rules, you understand it. It's like, oh, there's the thing like cascade, there's the thing like specificity, and there's also things like dependency load order. So there's all these things, and the dreaded important.
Is that still something you need nowadays? Like, no, okay, thank God.
In my opinion, but there are times you really have to go nuclear on certain things when you're trying to override, maybe a library that has already used important, and then you're like, you have no choice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. But hopefully, most of those libraries are not using important anymore, right? I don't even know.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be back when I had to write some CSS, which I largely don't anymore. But like, yeah, it was a thing. Like you had to use it quite a lot because stuff was just broken.
You just had to you're just trying to wrangle. You had to wrangle things, which is frustrating.
Yeah. Things definitely have gotten better, and I'll have to check out like using CSS model. I avoid the CSS and JS myself as well. I never was a fan of it. I always felt I like that it's specific to that particular component, which is nice. So like you can style that component without worrying about like, oh, is this going to affect everything else across my site? But it's just kind of messy and like you said, not good separation of concerns, and I think you end up being. If I feel like the times I've done it, maybe it's because I don't know what I'm doing. I felt like I had a lot of repetitive pieces because I'd put the same thing in multiple files and then fixing it was a mess. So
yeah, and that's that's another reason why you have like design systems, and sometimes you have like design tokens, and then you also have CSS variables, and like CSS modules are scoped to that component. So you're still right there. You don't have the collisions because you have something that's scoped to the component. And there's so much.
I'd love to have you come back and talk just about CSS modules. That'd be so cool because I really think we haven't talked a lot about CSS stuff, and it'd be great to hear more about that. But